Hi, class. Welcome back to our English Comp 2 Learning in a Pandemic lecture series. Today we're going to go through MLA, and this should be a review from Comp 1, but maybe some of us didn't learn it as thoroughly as we want. Maybe some of us, it's been a long time since we took Comp 1, so we need a review session. Or, maybe for the first time, some of you are really starting to get engaged in the writing process. So that's awesome. And we're going to go through this together. Now, you're working on a really long research paper. And for some of you, it's probably the longest research paper that you've ever attempted. So just take a deep breath. We're going to have to tackle this piece by piece. And yeah, so let's get going. Now, I know a lot of you are thinking this. Why do I have to go through this again? Why is this so important? And so a big thing for me is when I first started to actually learn MLA for the purpose of wanting to understand it and not just wanting to make it as simple or as easy as possible, I actually found that I liked engaging in the process a lot more once I understood why the rules were the way that they were. For me, I've never been very good at just arbitrarily following instruction without understanding the purpose of it. So that's kind of how I'm going to teach you MLA, right? Because that's the way that it can most make sense to me. All right, so what is the MLA? MLA is the Modern Language Association. So in other words, it's a group of scholars and professionals, all relevant to the field of English, studying English literature, that get together and decide sort of how we can keep modern American standard English relevant. And we're also looking at ways that we can create modes of research that is easily traceable. So that's especially important when we're studying MLA, because that's exactly what we're doing, is we're looking at ways that we can look specifically at research so that we can trace other people's research and grow from that research, right? So MLA lays down 7 very easy rules to follow, right? The first one is always use size 12 Times New Roman font, which we've been over 100 times. So I hope we're starting to remember this, right? Next, always double space and make sure the after setting is at 0 points, right? We've already gone over this in class together, but if you do not make sure, you don't click that box that says do not add space between paragraphs of the same style, it's going to make it to where your paragraphs are double spaced, which is going to affect format, which will then affect page count. Have your surname and page number in the top right-hand corner, right? So in other words, make sure that you have your last name and page number in the upper right-hand corner. Always have your document aligned left flush, right? So this is the automatic setting on Microsoft Word, but sometimes I've noticed that when students start becoming really proud of what they're working on, or they're really starting to get engaged in the learning process, they start wanting to do fancy things to their format, like make their papers center align flush, where it makes it even on both sides of the page. You don't do that, right? So a big reason that MLA has all of these rules is because what we're trying to do is we're trying to create a format that is the easiest to read, right? As 12 font, Times New Roman, double space is actually the easiest style and format to read, right? So these rules aren't just arbitrary. Or next, 5, always have your name, your instructor's name, course name, and date in the upper left-hand corner of the page, right? So it's just proper MLA heading, which we've also gone over in class, but just for some of you, here it is again. Always have a title for your essay. And then lastly, always have an in-text citation and a corresponding works cited page, unless otherwise told by your instructor not to do so. So I'm definitely not telling you to do so right now. And again, right, we have a works cited page because what the works cited page is doing is it's saying, look at all of this research. This is the research that's featured in the essay. And so that maybe if you write a really beautiful paper, and I've actually done this before, I go and I look at the research that you did because maybe I'm really curious and I want to see, what you were looking at, find out how or what is going on in that field. And then maybe I even study further into that topic, right? And that's the ideal that we're trying to achieve in our class because we're not writing, right? Remember, we're thinking about audience, we're thinking about purpose, we're thinking about tone, all things that we've been working on throughout the semester. So I'm not writing this paper just to appease a college professor in an English 1020 class. What would be the point of doing that, right? No, instead, I'm writing this paper so to an audience, to the intelligent person in the hallway, or to a member of my field, so that they can grow or be enriched by the research that I've been doing. Okay? So these are all things to start thinking about. It is really helpful if you make a paper that looks like an A paper instead of one that looks crazy. It's just already sort of showing me a certain preparedness, a certain level of interest, a certain level of attention to detail that I'm going to take note of as we're going through the paper, right? If I find that the source looks uncredible, well, that's going to affect the way that I consume the information that's in that source. Sorry, I had to finish cleaning my glasses. There we go. Now I can kind of read. All right, so the MLA heading is we have name, instructor's name, course name, and then date. Next we have title, right? So we have the title of this paper is, and then lastly right here, we have last name and page number. Easy. In-text citations, the basics. So never use a citation machine. Always do citations by hand. And I cannot stress this enough, right? And I'll tell you a story about when I was an undergrad. I had a professor who, it was one of my upper level English courses, and he had assigned, I think it was a 15 to 20 page paper, end of term paper, and we were tasked to write on any literary theory that we wanted. And so I wrote my heart out, right? It was the Robin Lee Lear Manifesto. I was very young and naive, right? And so I wrote a 18-page paper. I had taken all the time that I needed in order to create the research and to get through the research. And I was proud of it. And I was really writing something that I was proud of, probably for the first time in my college career. And I turned in that essay, and my instructor did not read a single word. Still a little bitter, if you can't tell. And instead, he simply turned to my works cited page, looked at the works, graded my works cited page, and that was what my entire paper grade was based on. Now, that's obviously an extreme scenario, but the truth is if I had not done my citations correctly, I would have failed the class. Okay? So know how to do this, because what you're doing is you're teaching yourself how to protect yourself against graders that might be as intense and severe as that. MLA gives the writer options for flexible presentation of sources. This flexibility lies in whether you choose to name the source within the sentence or not, right? So what that means is we have to think about it. MLA is the style guide for English literature, right? It's just one style guide. There's lots of different style guides. History uses Chicago style. The sciences use APA. Sociology even has its own special style guide in that discipline. And so a lot of what MLA is based off of readability, right? So we want our sources not to interfere with the writing of our actual with the language of our paper as much, right? So MLA gives you, the author, flexible varieties in how to present your source information. There will always be an in-text citation for a direct quote or for specific information from a particular source for print sources. Okay, now these rules sound really confusing, but we're going to look at examples of them in a second. Okay. Lastly, electronic sources will have an in-text citation if the source is not written into the sentence. And really, that should say the electronic source will have an in-text citation if the source is not written into the sentence and does not have an author, right? So we'll look at what that means here in a second. Examples of in-text citations. Here we go, right? We're looking at the thing itself. So, to give the audience an impression that captured the president's essence in a comedic manner, he wrote, having learned nothing about the evils of war, and because he simply had additional testicles instead of the parts of the brain that regulates fear, Jackson went on to write in the War of 1812, the first Seminole War, and when he ran out of wars, he just went dual crazy. O'Brien, 44. Okay, so the way that this is structured is that we have to give the audience an impression that captured the president's essence in a comedic manner, he wrote, having learned nothing about the evils of war. Who is the he? The he is not the same he that follows here, right? This is President Jackson. This he is O'Brien. Right? And so because I do not name O'Brien right here, I have to name O'Brien after the source information or after the quotation, right? So we do that because we have to be able to locate this on our Works Cited page. And so because I did not name O'Brien here, I have to name him here. So O'Brien, 44. To give the audience an impression that captured the president's essence in a comedic manner, O'Brien wrote, having learned nothing about the evils of war. 44. So because I named O'Brien here, I do not have to name O'Brien here. Again, what is MLA always doing? MLA is trying to cut down on redundancy. So it would be redundant for me to say O'Brien, O'Brien. Again, readability. That's a big thing in MLA. Is the source readable? Does it make sense? Now, we're going to pretend for a second that instead of finding this source from O'Brien, I found this same quote from Insane Presidents. Their finger is on the button. www.insanepresidents.com. And I found this information under the section titled Jackson. To borrow the phrase, he had additional testicles instead of the parts of the brain that regulates fear. Andrew Jackson. Okay? So what this is doing is this is signaling to me, because I don't have page number, right? And some of your electronic sources are going to have page numbers, right? A lot of you are going to be looking at online academic journals. And so while you're doing that, you're going to notice that those sources have a tendency to still have page numbers. So you'd use a page number here, right? If I introduce the source, I would use a page number here. If I didn't, I would use the source information and page number. But we're looking at an electronic source by a corporate author. So there is no named author. So this, I would look for Andrew Jackson on my Works Cited page. According to Insane Presidents, their finger is on the button. The company writes about Jackson's fearlessness because he likely had additional testicles instead of the parts of the brain that regulates fear. Now we've got a lot of different things going on in this this passage, right? So according to insane presidents, their fingers on the button. So that's the title of the source where I found the information from, right? The company. So that means it's a corporate author. That's why I don't list the author, right? And the author is very important in MLA, right? In other style guides, dates are more important, okay? But in MLA, the author is very important. So I've listed the company writes about Jackson's fearlessness being because he likely had additional testicles instead of the parts of the brain that regulates fear. And then I have no citation afterwards. Why? Well, it's easy because I've already named my source and I don't have further information to help you locate the source. So I've put quotation marks here around where the quotation is, and I've introduced a source. So that's as much as I need to do. Okay. Don't feel like you have to have an in-text citation if you've listed the source and there isn't further information to help me locate that source. Now, I'm also doing something really interesting here, right? See where it says likely? He likely. These brackets indicate that I added this passage into the quote. And you're allowed to do that, right? You cannot change the meaning of a quote, right? If I put he likely didn't have, sorry, how would I make that? He likely would not have had additional testicles instead of the parts of the brain that regulate fear, right? He likely would not have had, right? I can't add all of that because what I'm doing is I'm changing the actual meaning of the source. And that's bad research, right? Instead, I can change information in the source for clarity or for readability, right? Again, because that's what's most important to MLA, readability. Okay? So we're just beginning. This is just in-text citations. Now, examples of in-text citations continued. Any quotes, quote, 3 lines or longer is considered a block quote. So, to give the audience an impression that captured the president's essence in a comedic manner, he wrote. Now, look right here. I've used a colon. Okay? So, I'm not introducing it the same way that I was introducing this earlier in the presentation, right? Instead, I'm using a colon. And what the colon symbolizes is that everything that's beyond this point until a citation is a quotation. Okay? So, having learned nothing about the evils of war, and because he simply had additional testicles instead of the parts of the brain that regulates fear, Jackson went on to fight in the War of 1812, the First Seminole War, and when he ran out of wars, he just went dual crazy. I love this quote. All right? So, I put colon and then enter. Having learned nothing about the evils of war. Notice that there's no quotation marks around this because I don't need them, because instead the format is actually showing me that this is a quotation, right? So I don't need additional signal phrases or any sort of signal to tell me that this is a quote. The format tells me that this is a quote. Having learned nothing about the evils of war and because he blah, 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 period. Now this is a big shift, right? Before, period would go after our citation. But again, in the block quote, because I am not using quotation marks, and because the format of this is showing me that this is a block quote, I put period and then O'Brien after it. Okay? So also look too that I have a hanging indent happening, right? It's 1 inch margin. So that's all that we need. Now we're going to look at examples of in-text citation, and we're going to look at examples of in-text citation for poetry. So, into my own. Frost expresses a desire to roam, stating, I should not be withheld, but that someday, slash. Into their vastness I would steal away, comma, slash. Fearless of ever finding open land. So when we're citing poetry, we would still integrate those lines of poetry into our sentence as long as it's less than 3 lines or 3 lines or less, right? So here we have, I should not be withheld, but that someday, slash. Into their vastness I should steal away, comma, slash. What I'm doing here is I'm maintaining the integrity of the line, right? Because in poetry, every little notation, every little mark is important. So I have to make sure that I'm maintaining the integrity of the line. So that's why I also here I have I should not, and then here I have into. And this is lowercase, comma, fearless of ever finding open land. 5 through 7. So this 5 through 7 is line numbers 5 through 7. Okay? So into my own, which is the title of the poem, Frost expresses a desire to roam, stating, I should not be withheld, but that someday, slash, into their vastness I should steal away, fearless of ever finding open land. In Revelation, Frost illustrates the way in which we see the world. So now we're going to look at how we would, let's go back. Okay, so now we're going to look at how we would cite poetry that is more than 3 lines. In Revelation, Robert Frost illustrates the way in which we see the world. We make ourselves a place apart, behind light words that tease and flout. But oh, the agitated here, till someone really finds us out. 1 through 4. So I'm citing here 4 lines of poetry, right? And over here I have, in Revelation, Robert Frost illustrates the way in which we see the world, colon. And the colon is shared in poetry. I should have mentioned that earlier. But we have colon. And so now we're going to format this the same way we would a block quote, except for we're going to maintain the integrity of each line. We make ourselves a place apart, behind light words that tease and flout, but oh, the agitated here, till someone really finds us out. 1 through 4. So that's again line numbers 1 through 4. And because I introduced Robert Frost, I don't have to put Frost 1 through 4, right? Now we got to do the works cited page. All right. Now it's time to work on the works cited page. Alana is my spirit animal, right? Thank you, girl. Yes, we got this. All right. So now what I want you to do is, what is this? It's hard to tell, right? Because this is a street address, right? But because the format of it is off, it's very confusing. And so I'm lost as to what this is until I put it in the correct order, right? And that's all that your works cited page is that it's telling me directions on how to find and trace your research. And if any of it's off, I get lost, right? I wish that I could take credit for that, but I definitely can't. But it's a great metaphor for how to look at MLA. All right. So MLA made easy too. We're doing good, guys. We're tramping along. The works cited page. This page should start on a new page. This means it should not be anywhere on the final page of your essay, no matter where the final words of the essay are on the page. Okay? So if I write a 57-page paper and then at the very end, I have 3 words that are on page 58, my works cited page starts on page 59, no matter what, right? The top of the page, at the top of the regular page, space the words works cited should be centered and the same font and in the same font as the rest of your paper. If you only have a single source, this would be a works cited page since there's only one work, right? So all that means is you guys like to do fancy things to your titles, and you don't do anything fancy to your titles. You don't put extra lines, you don't put extra spaces above your title, because then that's going to affect page count, and that's going to have some pretty negative ramifications in my class. You don't underline your titles, you don't bold your titles, you don't make them a font size larger. You leave them as they are, and it's the same as the works cited page. The only thing that's special about the title is that it's centered, right? So for proper indentation of citations in MLA, you need to have a hanging indent. So to create one of the first highlight all entries. Next, go to paragraph and then look under indentation section. Under that section, you will see the note special and you select hanging. So we've already been over this in class, right? But you're going to want to make sure that you have the hanging indent not just for your works cited page, but also for your annotated bibliography, right? So, in other words, when we look at our works cited page, we see that we have. So, in other words, when we look at our works cited page, we have it listed alphabetically. So I have C, G, N, Z, right? My citations are going alphabetically. Again, this just helps me be able to locate what I'm looking for specifically on your works cited page faster. I have works cited. And if you look, I have more than one work cited, so it's a works cited page. Then I have my hanging indent, and I have my hanging indent for every single source that I have listed. And then lastly, not to leave anything out, I have my last name and page number. Right? Easy. Contain your excitement. Oh, I had to put a pun in there, right? I had to put a pun in there. MLA is boring. I know. Stay with me. We're doing good. I can only imagine how boring MLA is when you're at home. Stay with me, people. Contain your excitement. When deciding how to cite your source, start by consulting the list of core elements. So, MLA recently had a huge update. And the only thing that really changed about what they were trying to do with this update is that, Quentin, stop. No. Sorry, my little pup is sitting next to me, right? So what they were trying to do with this update is they're trying to figure out a way to make every single source the same citation, right? So it used to be that in MLA you had to look up like a different way to cite almost every single source. There were some similarities, right? But it was a little bit more difficult. What MLA is trying to do now is they're trying to streamline citation so that everything can be cited the exact same way. So you're going to follow this list of core elements. These are the things that are most important for your sources. So the first thing is author. An author is important to MLA, right? Because it's an English style guide, English literature style guide. So the ownership of works is very important to people within that field, right? So we're always going to look for author first, and if we can find author first, author is going to be listed first. Then we have the title of the source, okay? Some of our sources might be self-contained, all right? Meaning that if I'm citing an entire book, then that source is self-contained. If I'm citing a chapter in a book, then that source is not self-contained, right? Instead, it's held within the book. If I'm citing an essay from an online journal, that means that that source is not self-contained, right? Note too that we have the correct punctuation that follows these listings. So we have author, period, then title of source, period. Then we have title of container, comma. Other contributors, comma, version, comma, number, comma, publisher, comma, and publication date, comma, and then lastly, location, right? Again, this is much easier than it appears to be, right? So contain your excitement. Each element should be followed by the punctuation mark that was above, right? And so let's just go and look at some sources. Quentin, sit. Okay. This is sort of a roadmap that can help guide you through all of the sources, right? If you ever wanted to write this down in your notes so that it helps you be able to check the validity of your online sources easier, that's a great idea. And note too that it still has the hanging indent. So let's look at some sources, revisiting in-text citations. So we've been working on this paper about Andrew Jackson and for some reason Robert Frost. I don't know why, but it's a great paper. And we come back to our first quote, which was to give the audience an impression that captured the president's essence in a comedic manner, he wrote. O'Brien 44. So I'm going to look for O'Brien 44. And I have to have a corresponding works cited page because I cited O'Brien 44. So here it is. O'Brien, Shawn Michael, period. In bitterness and in tears, Andrew Jackson's destruction of the Creeks and Seminoles, period. Right? So we have O'Brien. I can go buy this version of this book, and then I can turn to page 44 and I'll be able to find that quote. That's all that we're doing, right? I first locate O'Brien. I see O'Brien in my source, and I can find that copy of that source by following and tracing our research, because that's what we're doing. Okay? Notice too that I have author's last name, comma, and then first name, and then middle period. Into my own, Frost expresses a desire to roam, stating, I should not be withheld, but that someday, blah, 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 lines 5 through 7. So I find Frost, comma, Robert, period, into my own. Collected poems by Robert Frost. Okay, so this is the author, Robert Frost, period. Into my own. That's the poem that I am citing, period. Notice too that the poem titles, short story titles, essay titles are in quotation marks, right? Smaller works that are a part of a larger whole go inside quotation marks. So think song titles, right? If I'm going to cite lyrics in a paper, I would put the song title in a quotation mark, and then the album title would be what is italicized. Robert Frost, collected poems of Robert Frost, and then I have compiled by Jacob Browning, right? And so what he's done is he's taken all of the works of Robert Frost and he's put them in one collection. So I don't have to go and buy a bunch of mini collections. Instead, I buy this one collection of all of Robert Frost's works. And he's compiled them and organized them. And so it was compiled by Jacob Browning, right? So he's an other contributor. This is our publisher. This is the date that it was published. And then this is the page number, the location of where I found it. And then that's it. So I'd turn to Robert Frost. I'd follow 5 through 7. Frost. I'd look at lines 5 through 7 in this. I'd go by this collection and I'd find the poem and how you were using the poem. Easy. Now this is Revelation. In Revelation, Robert Frost illustrates the ways in which we see the world. Same thing. The only thing that would be different is see that I have these 3 hash marks. So again, my works cited page goes in alphabetical order. And so I've listed Robert Frost already. Robert Frost into my own, right? Which comes before our Revelation. So because I've already listed Frost, I do not have to list Frost again. Instead, I would put 3 hash marks. 1, 2, 3, period. Revelation. Everything else is the same except for page number, because obviously it's on a different page number, right? I know. It's confusing. I know. Your brain hurts. Just stay with me, okay? We're almost done. 1, 2, 3. I follow that trail. I go to this citation. I find this work, and then I can find your thing. We're finished, right? We cited everything from our first lecture, right? We can't forget about insanepresidents.com, right? So we have our electronic source. According to Insane Presidents, their finger is on the button. The company writes about Jackson's fearlessness because he likely had additional testicles instead of the parts of the brain that regulates fear. This again is a work by a corporate author. So that means that they don't have a listed author or that a company paid for it, right? If we're going to look at a lot of you who might be doing cancer research for your paper, right, you'll find that some medical sites don't list authors. Instead, they list a corporation, which has a respectable name. And so they pay people to write articles for their periodical. So they don't have an author's name, right? Because they're just staffed. But so I'm not writing a paper about every single crazy United States president, unfortunately. So instead, I have to put the section of the website that I'm getting my information from, and that section is the section on Andrew Jackson, titled Andrew Jackson. Okay, so Andrew Jackson, period. There's no author, so I skip it. Period. I have my quotation marks, and then we have insane presidents. Their finger is on the button. This is when it was published, 21 August 2018, and then I have www.insanepresidents. And then lastly, and this is what is most unique about about electronic sources, is I also include when I accessed it. So accessed on 6 August 2015. Right? And including the URL is probably the biggest shift that I've noticed that students, or biggest issue that I've noticed students are having with the shift in MLA, right? Because it used to be long ago, we did include the URL, and then all of a sudden we didn't include the URL, and now we're back to including the URL. Now we're done. We did it. We cited every source that we had in our previous lecture. So now what I want you to do is I want you to take, we are going to do a 5-minute free writing exercise. All right. And so now what we are going to do is we are going to do a 5-minute free writing exercise. So I'm going to set a timer on my phone for 5 minutes. And what I've done is I've given you all of the information that you need here to cite this work. So go ahead, take those 5 minutes and cite this source. Also, as a reminder that you're going to have to turn these free writes in your free writing journal. So this would be one of your 5-minute free writing exercises. Got about 30 more seconds. Alrighty. So, ready for the answer? We have author's name, Worcester Matthew, period, The Battle of New Orleans, Reconsidered, Andrew Jackson, and Martial Law. Okay, so this is the title of our essay, Louisiana History, the Journal of Louisiana Historical Society. So that's the title of the work that this essay is contained in. Volume 39, comma, number 3, comma, 1998, page number. And then this is our second container. So even though this was originally in this journal, the Louisiana History, I found it through JSTOR. So JSTOR, and then my access date. Okay. All right, so now I've also included in this some commonly used sources, books, scholarly journals, and YouTube. And I included one more fun one. So this would be how we would cite a book, right? Again, they all follow the same pattern, but what I've done here is I've included examples of books. A scholarly journal, again, follows that same pattern. This is sort of instructions that are specific to scholarly journals that you'd find. And then here's an example of one that's been cited. YouTube videos, right? And again, we talked already about how like something that we have to start doing is we have to start being able to identify the validity of sources. And you can now watch lecture series online. Like, I think technically these are YouTube videos that I'm having to create. So maybe you want to cite a professor doing a lecture series. Well, that would definitely be a credible scholarly source, right? In the beginning, we used to be really afraid of YouTube because I think it just started off as like a bunch of 5-minute anime clips and cat videos. But now, you can find some really important and cool quality stuff online. So this would be how you'd cite a YouTube video. And then lastly, a tweet, right? Because believe it or not, tweets are becoming more and more relevant, especially in our current politics today, right? So you might need to know how to cite a tweet. And so I've also included an example of how we would cite a tweet, as well as some instructions on that. To conclude, right, if you're having issues or if you just like to be able to consult something that I use a lot is Purdue OWL, right? It doesn't have every single source on there, but it has a lot of sources on there. So, and these are all credible and correct, that you'll find only correct information on Purdue. Lastly, don't forget about the ask the professor button. Discussion board. This is like the equivalent of being able to raise your hand in class, since you can't raise your hand in the online class. But feel free to post any sort of questions that you have there, and I will be happy to answer anything that you might need. And so now let's do our very last free write for today. It's a 10-minute in-class free writing assignment, okay? So again, set a timer on your phone for 10 minutes. And I want you to write an epistolary short story. An epistolary story is a narrative written as a series of documents. The usual form is letters, although diary entries, newspaper clippings, and other documents are sometimes used. For this week's in-class free writing exercise, I want you to write a story using only tweets, right? Try to make it have a beginning, middle, and end. And we're going to look at plot. We've looked at plot this semester. So try and make it have a narrative arc, okay? And just have fun. You're writing a story with tweets, so that's hilarious. Again, be safe. Keep yourself healthy. If you have any questions, you've been given my cell phone number. And, just try and be respectful. Don't call me at 2 a.m, rude, right? But, reach out. I'm here to help you. You're not alone through all of this. And yeah, I'll be seeing you at your paper conferences very soon. So have a wonderful week. Happy writing, happy research, stay safe. Luckily, research, we can do from a safe distance from other people. So talk to you later. I'll see you next week, and be safe. Bye.